this video, we're going to make a single section pamphlet binding. It incorporates a lot of the basic processes involved in bookbinding and is a really good starting point. This has hardcovers, it has end papers, it has a quarter cloth binding with decorative paper sidings. You can use your own artwork to go on here. Obviously in time you can have your own artwork inside as well. I'm just going to talk you through the step-by-step process of making this book. So the first thing to do is to fold and slit your sheet of paper down to A5. So we're going to start with 2 sheets of A2 paper. You saw before that one sheet forms a 16-page booklet with the grain direction running up and down. So with 2 sheets of paper, that will make a 32-page booklet. So I'm going to take my piece of paper and I'm marrying up the short edge to short edge, and then using my finger to crease along there. I'm using my bone folder to sharpen that crease, and then I'm using my cobbler's knife, and it's easiest if you just have it slightly to the edge of the bench. You want your cobbler's knife flat or parallel to the bench, and you're doing a sort of a circular motion. I'm right-handed. I would start from this end. If I was left-handed, I would probably start from this end. So I'm inserting the knife into the fold, and you can see I'm coming down onto the fold like this. And I'm going to slit to just beyond the halfway point. Guessing that this is halfway, I'm stopping about here. The reason we do this is so that when you come to do this next fold, you don't get that nasty crease of paper in the fold. But it still remains as one single unit, not lots of separate sheets of paper flapping around. So I've done my fold, sharpen, slit, quarter turn, marrying up these edges, using your finger to go down to crease it, using the edge, you're using the edge of your bone folder, and you can be quite firm with this paper, and then you're going to slit in the center of that fold, just beyond the halfway point, another quarter turn, and fold in half again. Don't worry that this pages step out a bit like this. We're going to trim them all down once it's been sewn and glued. I'm just going to take another sheet of paper and quickly fold and slit that as well. So I now have 2 16-page sections. In order to make a 32-page booklet, I'm going to insert one inside the other like so. I'm now going to use one of my bulldog clips to clip the pages together like this so that they're all held together. The next stage is to mark the position of the holes prior to piercing. So again, I'm going to trust my powers of estimation. I want to bring in the end holes about 15 millimeters in from either end, but I know that my finger is also about 15 millimeters, like so. I'm then going to have a mark centrally placed between those two, and then another mark equidistant between those as well. So this is a 5-hole pamphlet stitch. This pamphlet stitch can be used for any size of book. The bigger the book, the more holes, but they always need to be an odd number of holes. So you can do a 3-hole for a little book, do 7, 9, 11, and so on. I'm going to take the point of my awl, I place it up to the mark, I fold the paper slightly over on top of the awl, and then I push through. This means that the point of the awl comes through on exactly in the center of the fold of the paper. You push through with the end of the awl into the heel of your hand and a slightly swiveling motion. If I press too hard down on the paper when I'm pushing through, you can find that the awl marks the paper, so just be a little bit careful. One other important health and safety consideration is to not put your fingers in the way of the emerging pointy thing. going to sew our pages together, we're going to take a length of thread that is a generous double height of the book, plus a bit for luck. We're going to wax the thread, so you draw the thread over the edge of the wax, like so. And take a needle. I've slightly squashed the end of the thread with my teeth, thread the needle. Now there's a cunning trick for keeping the needle on the thread so that when you're sewing it doesn't come unthreaded and you have to start all over again. You take the short tail of the thread, you wrap it tightly around your finger, you pierce through the centre of the thread, you then draw the thread down the shaft of the needle and down onto the long tail, and then you pull the long tail tight and it will tighten the thread at the eye of the needle without any knot. To sew the book, if we want to see the knot, the start and finish of the sewing, we can start from the inside of the book. If we want to hide it, so it's a bit more of an invisible thing, you will start from the outside of the section because it will get hidden underneath the cloth of the spine. So the first thing to do is to go through the centre hole. I then clip the tail of the thread underneath the bulldog clip, because that stops you pulling it through by accident. You're now going to go through one of the holes. We'll go to the one above it. If you hold the pages slightly bent, it will keep the holes in alignment. Then in the same direction up to the end. Now you're going to go back through this hole. It's important that you don't accidentally pierce through the thread because then you will find it hard to tighten up the sewing at the end. Here I'm now going to skip over the centre and go down to the other end. Then up to the top, well, what is now the top, end hole in that direction. Back through here. And finally finishing up at the centre hole. So if you've done it correctly, you will have a single line of thread on the inside and a single line of thread on the outside. It's essentially a figure of 8 at one end, skip over the centre, a figure of 8 at the other end, finish where you started. You can see now that the two tails are on one side of the centre thread. I want to ensure I have one on one side and one on the other. So I'm going to take the needle underneath that centre line. Now they're on each side. I also want to draw up the tension. It's a bit loose, this sewing. I want it nice and tight. The simplest way to do that is to pull up the end threads and then pull up the tail threads. You're then going to tie a double knot or a reef knot. You're going to go right over left and under, pull tight, and then left over right and under and pull tight. Finally, trim about 1 centimetre away from the knot, like so. And you have now sewn your text block. Your pages are joined together. The next part of the process is tipping on the Endpapers, where they are glued with a small line of glue to the first and last page of the text block. You can generally see in most commercially produced books that you may not have noticed it, but it's very similar process. In order to do that, we have our 2 sheets of coloured paper that are twice the size of the book. And again, the grain direction is running this direction because we want it to end up running parallel to the spine. So we're going to fold those in half, like so. And with the bone folder, sharpen that crease. So I need 2 like that. And this is a slightly heavier weight paper than the text block. In the shop, if you use the Murano coloured paper, that's a good weight. It's about 160. And for the text paper, use about a 120 cartridge paper. So I have my text block here, a waste sheet down on the bench. I take the folded edge of one of the Endpapers and place that onto the waste sheet. I take the second folded edge and I place that on top, about 5 millimeters down, masking off everything but the top 5 millimeters of the first one. And then I take a second sheet of waste paper. I find it's better if you fold it in half, and that gives you a good, strong, straight line. And I place it over the top of the second Endpaper. I'm going to add a little bit of water to this glue because it's a little bit thick. Mix it up well. I'm brushing on glue and I'm brushing it on in an outwards direction at all times. If I brush it in, I will pick up the paper and get glue in on the side where I don't want glue. So ensuring I've got enough glue all the way along, I remove my top waste and I get rid of it. I take it off the bench. So you can see now I've got a 5mm strip of glue along the folded edge. I take the text block, I pitch it onto the text block so that it's in line with the spine, and I use my bone folder to press it down. I then flip over, take the second glued end paper, flip it over, marry it up with the spine edge and compress it down. If your end papers are a little bit bigger than the book block, that doesn't matter because the whole thing will get trimmed all at once. I'm now going to show you how to trim your book block by hand. You can use the electric guillotine, which is in the digital print room, and I'll show you on a different video some of the health and safety features of that. But for now, we're going to learn how to trim by hand because you probably don't have an electric guillotine in your home. We want to trim the book so we have nice straight edges, that all the pages line up. We have good right angles at each corner, and to release the pages that are still joined together at the fold. You may already have trim marks which have been printed on like this, which will come from the printer, so that will tell you exactly where to trim to. But if you're just trimming off a blank book like this, you're going to look down here to where the shortest page is. So I'm going to go to about there, and I'm going to measure from the spine. Here is 145, and I'm going to transfer that mark, bringing it down the page. So again, butt up the edge of the ruler to the spine, mark 145, and a third time 145. We always measure 3 times and then cut once, because if I only did it 2 marks and one of them was off, I wouldn't know that it was off. So all my force is down this left arm holding this ruler, so it's not moving at all, and I'm just stroking each page. I'm not trying to cut through the whole book at once. It's also important to remember to keep the knife upright, perpendicular to the bench, not at an angle, and also to bring it up to the ruler, follow it all the way down until you come off. I'm obviously exaggerating, but it's very easy to come in a bit late and off a bit early. So bring it up to there. I'm not trying to cut through everything at once, just with a couple of pages at a time. One other point to remember is really important to keep this finger away from the edge of the ruler, because you don't want to be slicing off the edge of your finger. So keep cutting all the way down until you've reached to the end, and now you'll have a nice straight clean edge that is definitely parallel to the spine. And now I know that this is parallel to here. I'm going to mark in here. So for this we use an engineer's square. So I bring it to the edge of the table. Because the engineer's square has a bit of a lip on it, you need to hang it over the edge of the bench so that when it sits on the book, it's dead flat on the book. The other important thing to ensure is that you don't cut off the sewing. So look down here to where the shortest page is, mark it on the outside, and I'm going to just draw a line, mark a line in like this. So I'm going to place my ruler up to that line. I always want to trim with the spine away from me, so when the knife hits the spine, if the spine is this side and you bring the knife into the spine, it tends to sort of pull back and get rucked up. So it's best to always have the spine away from you. So I now have a trimmed book block with all the pages freed up. We're now going to calculate the size of the boards to fit around our book block. When you open up most books, you'll see how the board extends on these 3 edges, and that protects the pages, and it is called the square. On most books, a book about this size, we use about 3mm is a fairly good average size. Obviously a bigger book would have a bigger square, and a smaller book a smaller square. So how to calculate that? I have my book block. I'm going to measure it. Because I've cut it perfectly accurately, I can see that it's the same measurement here and here, 145, and my height 204. In order to create the height of the boards, I need to add 3mm at the top and 3mm at the bottom. So that goes to 210. And the width I'm going to keep it the same. And you might think, that's strange. But if you see here on this book, we've created a hinge. And we need to create this hinge in order for the board to open. So by taking a board, which is the same width as the book, and bringing it forward by 3mm at the spine, you then magically create your 3mm square at the foredge. Just very quickly, the names of the parts of the book: the head, the tail, the spine, and the foredge. So I've got my calculations of the size of the boards. So I want to cut them so that it's 145 by 210. That one is already cut, helpfully. This one I'm just going to trim off to show you how to cut it by hand. So I happen to know that this is a bit wide. So I'm going to measure 145 in 3 places. It's very similar to trimming the book block. I use the engineer's square to draw in a line to ensure that it's going at right angles, making sure the ruler doesn't move. Extend out the knife. So I now have a board, 2 boards rather, that are the same width as the book block, but they are 3mm taller top and bottom. The next stage is to wrap a piece of mull around the back of the section, and this acts as a reinforcement for your Endpapers and your book in itself. You can stitch through the mull at the same time as you are sewing the book block, but I find it's quite enough just to run a line of glue along the spine edge, making sure I've got enough all the way along. So this strip of mull is just smaller than the book, and you want to work it down, use your finger or your bone folder just to work it down to make sure it's well stuck. To start making the case, you take a strip of cloth for the spine, and this is a quarter binding. Traditionally, the cloth would have extended a quarter along the width of the board of the book. If you imagine this is halfway, quarters to about there. I find that this is a little bit wide for our contemporary aesthetics. I tend to go a little bit narrower. On a book this size, I take a piece of cloth that is 7 centimetres wide, and it needs to stick out by a couple of centimetres or so at the top and bottom so that you'll be able to fold it in. You take your piece of cloth and you gently fold it in half. Don't crease it too hard because you want to give yourself a little bit of leeway in case you need to adjust it later on. I then put a pencil mark in that centre of that fold. The 2 boards will get glued on like this, but we need to work out what that gap will be. In order to understand the width of the gap, we take our book block with the mull attached. We lay 1 board on top on one side, ensuring that it's sticking out on the foredge here, and similarly the other board marrying up the corners, ensuring that the spine is sticking out. I then get a strip of paper and I wrap it around the back, and I mark from board edge to board edge. This measurement is then what you're going to use to place your boards. You can either measure it and then use a ruler, or you can just use these marks and transfer them onto your cloth. You fold it back on itself, marrying up those 2 points, and then that will give you the halfway mark. Place the halfway mark on the middle line and transfer those marks either side. You're then going to place your ruler along the bottom because you need to ensure that your boards are glued on in a straight line so your book stands up straight. You take one of the boards and you're going to glue a line along one board edge. I teach it this way to minimise the amount of gluey waste paper that we have. So it's approximately 3 centimetres wide line of glue like that. I'm placing it up to those marks with an evenish amount of cloth sticking out at either end. Press it down. Use your bone folder to rub the cloth down to make sure it's well stuck. Now place a ruler along the bottom. Take your second board, again a line of glue like so. You don't want too much glue. You need enough glue to ensure you've got glue everywhere, but not too much so that it's oozing all over the place. I line up my second board with the ruler and with the marks. I've got an even gap running in the middle. Flip it over. Rub down, and now we're going to glue the turn-ins, a bit of glue along the bottom and on the edge of the board here. You have your 4 fingers underneath and you bring your thumb to bring it over and make sure it's well stuck down. Use your bone folder to rub it down, and also along the board edges here. We now have our case. It's worth just checking that your book fits inside the case. So you want to ensure that the book is tight in at the spine and that you have a nice even amount of board showing around all three edges. So we now need to attach the decorative paper, or hopefully you've brought your own artwork. If you're bringing your own artwork, something is around a 120 to 160 GSM weight is perfect. And we want to ensure that when we glue this paper on over the cloth, that it sits at an equal height here and here for your book to look professional. So I want to ensure that when I stick my paper over the top, that when I stick it on this side, it's the same as the one that I do on this side. I'm going to go measure from this side because it's the shorter length. I put a crease on the board edge here so that I can see where I'm measuring from here to here. So I'm going to measure from here, and I want to ensure that my paper covers the cloth edge. So I'm putting in a mark at 25 millimeters, and I'm going to do the same up here and also on the other side. So I'm now going to take my patterned paper. Some paper will have an obvious up and down, the correct way up, so it's important that you ensure that when you put the paper on the front and back board that they're both going in the same direction. Again, grain direction is important, that it's going up and down parallel with the spine. I'm going to glue out my whole sheet of paper, and you need to glue from the center out. If you bring your brush in this way, you'll pick up the paper and you'll get glue on the good side of your paper. And then move my fingers to the other end and glue down the other end. I'm going to carefully peel it away from the waste paper, get rid of the waste paper, and I'm just pitching it just over those marks that you made with an even amount of paper at either end. When you're happy with its placement, smooth it down with your hands, and you're going to cut 45 degrees across the corner. But it's very important that when you cut that 45 degrees, that you cut at least a board's thickness away from the corner of the board. And then you're going to fold in the turn-ins here, pulling it tightly around the board edge, turn around and fold in the other end. Now, where you trimmed a board's thickness away from the corner, now you need to nick in this little extra tail. If you cut it too close, when you then fold in this piece, you'll see grey board, and you don't want to see that. Fold that over, bring it in tightly, and rub down with the bone folder. Making sure that you rub along the board edges as well, and then repeat for the other side. The final stage is called casing in. So I've checked that my case fits. It's just good to visualize where you're going to place the book block in the case. Take a waste sheet, open up the first end paper, and we're going to get some glue under the mole first, then bring the mole down on top, and again always gluing from the center out. Carefully lift up your end paper and take out the waste sheet. You can just gently bend it back on itself, and it should then sit flat. Now I find the easiest way is to pick up the whole book block and turn it over. So I'm holding it up still, I'm not positioning it permanently, I still have it held up here, looking at all three edges. And you should also be able to see those marks that you made at the center line. So when I'm happy, I press down with my hands, turn it around. Lift up the end paper, take out the waste sheet, curl up the corners. Now for here, I find the easiest way is I take this part of the case and I pull it up, and then I bring it over. I'm looking here and here. I'm going to press. So I'm going to open up the first end paper and slip a sheet of plastic in here, and here, and here as well. Maybe put a piece of waste sheet of paper on top. They go in the nipping press. Tighten it, turning the handle hand to hand until it's tight. Count to 10. You can leave it in for longer, but 10 is enough. Loosen the handle and take out your plastic sheets. So now you've made a book from scratch. You have all the basic techniques that you can go forward and use in bookbinding.